Welcome, Ms. Atang, to the show, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So now, a lot has been written on health magazines and blogs, saying that masturbation is healthy for you. What do you have to say? Do you agree with them or
not? I disagree completely, both from a spiritual and non-spiritual perspective. And when we first realize, when we get caught up in something that we feel is kind of iffy, or we're not too sure about what we're doing, but then we continue to do it, when you find yourself caught up spending time watching porn and masturbating, and when you start out, it's usually like 30 minutes turns into hours, and hours turns into days, and suddenly you find yourself doing this as part of your daily routine. We have to recognize addiction as an addiction, as what it is. And that's the first step to recovery if we're seeking help, if we really want to know if what we're doing is right or wrong, regardless of whether you're trying to please God or if you're just trying to be a good person or live right. So no, I don't agree, despite what the health magazines say. They say it's good for your body. They say it's good to release those hormones, but the negative effects outweigh the positive health effects, if there are any. But I don't believe that there
are. Masturbation comes with a lot of guilt, right? Even after like 5 minutes, 10 minutes pleasure, however long it lasts, even after all pleasure, you still feel guilty. A lot of people do, especially those who are, religious, some who are spiritual, so after doing all that, they still feel guilty. Why is that?
One reason why a lot of people would say it is because sexuality, or things about sexuality, are, because they're not so talked about, or they're increasingly talked about now in culture, but because they weren't talked about previously, it really put a lot of people in a box and made people feel ashamed for things that they shouldn't. That's what is mostly argued today. But what I know to be true is that when you grow up in a certain household with a certain upbringing, whether that's cultural, African culture, Indian culture, foreign American culture, doesn't matter. You know that inside of you, there are morals and values that are placed inside of you. And so when you do something against those morals and against those values, that feeling of guilt will come, whether or not you know that what you're doing is wrong. But that feeling of guilt lets you know that what you're doing is wrong. So that could be a reason why a lot of people feel guilty afterwards. But of course, we want to try to start to justify that guilt, or try to get over it, which is why the feeling of guilt isn't enough to make a lot of people stop, because again, it's a temporary feeling, and it eventually goes away by the next time you're watching porn and masturbation again.
Why is it that? I mean, a lot of people are in one way or the other, maybe not addicted, but a lot of people do masturbate, whether as a child, as a teenager, as an adult. Sometimes even married people do it, So why is it that it's something that is shameful for people to talk about in public? It's something that is done secrecy, you do it when nobody's watching, but there's so many things that are being talked about now. I mean, people talk about sex. I mean, it's everywhere. TV, commercials, adverts.
Yeah.
But none of you can't talk about masturbation. You're not proud to say, "Oh, I masturbate. I just finished masturbating," or something like that. Why we got to talk about it in public?
Yeah, it has a lot to do with keeping things secret. And when you find yourself when you start to lock doors, or you start to keep things from your friends, keep things from your close friends, your family members, it really has to make you question, is what I'm doing really right? I understand privacy, but there's a level to privacy that can surpass doing something wrong in your private time. So if you find that there's no one, or you don't feel comfortable talking to anyone about this, you have to start to question whether or not what you're doing is right. So the feeling of shame comes about because, once again, we know deep inside, even if we don't admit it to ourselves, we know deep inside that what I'm doing is very questionable. It's very wrong. So the shame comes about when we live in a culture that isn't glorifying self-pleasure. But for someone who does live in a culture that glorifies self-pleasure, or they have grown up in and around family members or friends who openly talk about these things, now the question comes about, well, why should I feel wrong about this? I was never told it was wrong, and I never felt bad about it. So now it comes to that question where it's like, what is that person supposed to think? You know, someone like that could watch this talk show and be like, I've never heard that pornography and masturbation was wrong. You know, I never thought twice about it.
Yeah.
So something like this could trigger them to question, maybe it is negative effects. I'm noticing some of these patterns in my life, and they seem to be negative, you know, so it could bring about that kind of questioning in their life.
Masturbation can affect your sex life, like when you're married, right? So your
Mm-hmm.
spouse and all that. That's when you masturbate frequently. Somebody who is addicted to it, does it in any way affect affect sex with your spouse?
Yeah, definitely. I've read a lot about testimonies where couples have divorced because one or both spouses could not give up a pornography and masturbation addiction, but ultimately the intimacy, their sex life, is completely ruined. And I've read that the indicators in the brain that let you know that you are aroused, or that let you know that this is what arouses you, the longer years that you spend watching porn, the longer the time you spend watching porn, those indicators get weaker.
About masturbation now, not once.
Yes, sorry. Yes. The longer that you masturbate, you have grown so used to pleasing yourself that when your spouse does it, you, in your mind, you're thinking, okay, my spouse can't do it the way I do it. Why even take part in these sexual acts? That's, again, something that we may not say verbally, but the bedroom is now defiled because that the bedroom is now messed up, and your intimacy is messed up with your spouse because you're like, I can please myself and my spouse can no longer do that for me.
You're expecting him or her to please you in a certain way that pleasures you, but for some reason he or she is not getting to that level, so you don't feel satisfied, right?
Yeah.
So because you're not satisfied, that can lead to, you know, separation, divorce and all that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so in some way it does affect your your sex life with your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you had experience with masturbation, right? So can you share your story? Tell us your story.
Yes, for sure. I was 9 years old when I came across a movie, and I believe it was a rated R movie. I don't remember what movie it was, but I know it was R-rated. And in R-rated movies, they allow explicit sex scenes in there. And in my mind, I was like, so this is how it works. You know, it's not something that's talked about in the household. And I hadn't gotten to the age where they talked about sex education in school. So me and my curiosity, in this bad sense, went and started Googling like sex videos or sex scenes. And that's how I came across pornography. And that's how my 10-year addiction had started. From pornography, of course, it's something that, you know, triggers your hormones. And I didn't know what to do with them at that point. And that's when the masturbation had started, when you start to touch yourself and start to get to know your body. And from that point on, things were getting worse and worse. And I was getting into videos and cartoons and different kinds of categories, would you say, different kinds of categories of these videos. And it led me down a dark path that had me questioning my sexuality. It kept me locked for years because I was like, not only do I feel like I'm the only one dealing with this, I am also a girl, and I'm also African. I'm from Cameroon. I'm also African. So there's no one that I can talk to about this. There's no one that I can reach out to. So guess what? I'm just going to have to be silent about it.
Yeah,
so when I got,
right?
sorry?
Right? Like you're the only one doing it.
Yes, I felt completely alone. So that also made me lock myself up even more. And I gave my life to Christ in 2014. But even after that, I was still battling back and forth with this addiction. And I would get so mad at God because I would say, how does one even get over this? This is a level that I can't surpass.
You fasted as well. You did all that.
Yes.
You never went away.
I did all that. Yeah, it didn't go away. I read the word because people would always tell me, oh, keep reading the word. Oh, just pray. And I'm like, what do you think I've been doing? You know? Yeah. So receiving those answers was also very frustrating because it's like, I've been doing that. And I just there came to a point where I settled with the fact that, okay, maybe God wants me to deal with this forever. I actually said, maybe this is the thorn in my flesh that Paul was talking about.
Carry your cross and follow me, right?
Yeah. And I was just like, well, I guess I'm just going to have to deal with this for the rest of my life. But even that conclusion was so unsettling. And I said, no, I know I'm not going to deal with this for the rest of my life, but I just don't know when I'm going to get over this. I don't want to get into a relationship still dealing with this, get into marriage still dealing with this. I really saw down the line it affecting my life so heavily. So it wasn't until last September when I finally reached out to my pastor's wife, and she was someone that God had
to come out of the open, right?
Yes. And with that, because I wasn't feeling super confident to come out, especially not to my pastor's wife. I was just like, of all people, God, I had reached that point where I was talking to my friends about it, or I was talking to people I was comfortable with, or people around my age. And that helped me up until a certain point. It helped me to break the silence, but it didn't help the deliverance process.
There was no fear of being stigmatized or being rejected, or fear of being, labeled in a certain way, especially as a Christian.
So there were people who didn't judge me based off of that, because that's another thing I was fearing, and that I was running from, was being judged and being looked at a certain way. But my friends did not do that, thank God. But I also knew,
very good thing, because a lot of people are afraid of that, and once they come out and they're being judged and labeled and stigmatized, go into a shell. That's what a lot of people need to know. So when someone is you need to love them. You need to love. You need to accept them. You need to help them deal with it, because it takes a lot for someone to come out and I'm addicted to this. So when somebody does that, you need to help the person.
And that's exactly what my pastor's wife did for me. She was not judgmental at all. She was very open, very loving to me. She prayed with me, and that really just encouraged me to have this clean slate with God. And that's when I was completely freed from this, and I had no urges to masturbate, no urges to watch porn. Like, that's when I knew that this particular struggle was completely done. But that was only because she was open. She was the right person that God led me to speak to, and she aided me spiritually in a way that encouraged me to move on past this, in a way that encouraged me to get over this. And that's how I knew, like, this struggle was not meant to last forever.
Fantastic. So you've been free for like a year or thereabout?
Yes, 1 year.
So are you afraid that maybe some years down the line you go back to masturbating? Are you afraid?
Especially with this 1 year anniversary coming up, with this 1 year anniversary being here, I had said, wow, okay, this is year one. God willing, I have many more years in my life. Like, God, is this really something, right? Is this really something that's like done forever? Especially since I'm 20 years old, so I spent half of my life dealing with this thing. And God was just like, yeah, like, you're done. You're absolutely done.
It's over, yeah?
It's over, yes. Over means over. God is not a God of halfway deliverance. No, he's totality.
How does it make you feel?
It makes me feel incredibly empowered, and it also encourages me to be wise. Because there are certain shows that takes the sexual scenes too far. It's all over social media. Instagram has let up. It's everywhere.
Magazines, everywhere you look.
You can't run from it, honestly, unless you close yourself up and live under a rock, but that's not realistic. So you can't run from it. So especially with something like this, it's not to put yourself in the position to see or hear these things, but it's like, you have to come to a point where, if I do see it, because there are some times on my Twitter timeline where someone will retweet a pornographic image or something like that. First, I unfollow that person, and that's done. Yes. But at that very moment, the Bible tells us to flee from all appearances of evil. And at that very moment, it's fight or flight, because it's like, I know something like this used to trigger me, and I know it's not triggering me now. However, I'm not going to be unwise and like sit there and watch, kind of a thing. So completely unfollow that person, delete the tweet, keep it scrolling. These are wise and practical things that we have to do.
Exactly. So there's a point where you have to take responsibility of what you see, what you hear, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show. What
Thank
do
you.
you say to someone who is watching this and who says, look, I'm addicted to masturbation and I love it,
Mm-hmm.
but I need help?
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say to
Mm-hmm.
that person?
Number one, I would say that there's freedom. There is freedom, and having hope placed within us encourages us to keep fighting. The one thing I would say is not to give up at all, and not to get comfortable or relaxed in a way that you just accept that this is what you're going to deal with. Number two, I would say that God, his intention is for all of us to be set free, whether you are saved or not saved, spiritual or not spiritual, because he loves us all. His intention is not for us to be bound to these addictions. So I would say that seek the Lord in any way you can, whether it's a church member or a wise church leader, or you just praying and crying out to God in your room.
But
He
someone
is
who's
here
like,
to deliver us.
then what of someone who's like a Christian?
I would say,
Pray, beat your pastor, that person says, okay,
mhm,
I'm not a Christian. So.
right. I would first say, decide within yourself what you take of this, because someone who doesn't see it as something wrong, they'll
Yeah.
just look past or listen past this information because they're like, well, this doesn't apply to me. But you have to decide within yourself, is what I'm doing wrong? And you have to be honest with yourself. I would say that's number
It's
one, and
not that
that's
there's
what.
conviction in your heart. That this is
Mhm.
wrong. Then you
Yeah,
have to help.
yeah.
Right? Okay, so
So
for someone who has fallen several times and says, okay, do you know what? I've tried to stop this. I tried
mhm,
several times, but every time, I fall back in. I
mhm,
probably take a break for like few months, few weeks, even few years, but I still fall back in. What do I do?
mhm,
I really need help. I need to stop.
mhm. I would do exactly what people were doing with me when I had shared my testimony. And, prayerfully, this will also open doors for people to be able to reach out. Reach out to someone who has experienced exactly what you've experienced. Pretty much exactly what you've experienced. There are a lot of girls who also told me like they too were battling things like sexual orientation. Their sexuality was beginning to be questionable. And that's something I had dealt with briefly with this pornography and masturbation addiction. So it would be to seek help from like-minded people you can relate with. I think that's what
And it's
Christians need
important
to
that there's
speak more
people you
about.
trust as well. It's important.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
You don't want to share your story with someone who goes, to social media and then tell them
Exactly,
yeah. So you have to be
exactly.
trust. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for this insightful you know, story and messages and all. And I
Mhm.
wish you all the best in your freedom and I
Thank
look
you so
forward
much.
to celebrating this is your first year anniversary, yeah, of freedom.
Yes, yes,
Celebrating your 20 years, 30
yes.
years.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye. God bless.